I'm Camilla Green, 34, and I turned an old, unwanted farm into a $12 million success. For years, I was the one holding my family together, showing up, helping Grandpa when no one else would. But when they mocked me for inheriting just dirt and shut me out like I didn't matter, I made a choice that changed everything. Ever been dismissed by the very people you stood by? If so, drop your story in the comments, you're not alone. Before I dive in, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to draw the line and take your power back, hit like and subscribe for more real stories about what happens when you stop asking for respect and start expecting it. Here's how it all started. My name is Camilla, and if you'd asked anyone in my family growing up, they would have told you I was the soft one. The quiet cousin who read too much, cried during animal rescue commercials, and clung to our grandfather like he was the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. They weren't entirely wrong. I was soft in some ways, gentler, more observant. But I wasn't fragile. And I sure as hell wasn't foolish. We all grew up together in rural Texas, me, my cousins Eric, Jenna, and Tyler. My mom was the youngest of three, and I was her only child. After my dad died when I was 6, we moved back in with Grandpa Bill to help out. That's what Mom called it, helping out. But really, she was helping herself stay afloat. Grandpa didn't seem to mind. He always said having a little more life in the house kept him young. The land had been in our family for nearly a century. 90 acres of dry, stubborn soil, oak trees that looked like they'd seen the Alamo, and a farmhouse that creaked no matter how much you reinforced the beams. It hadn't turned a real profit since the late 90s, but to Grandpa, the land wasn't about money. It was about history, memory, legacy. The others, my cousins, they visited on holidays, maybe for a long weekend once in a while. They show up in shiny trucks, bring pre-cooked barbecue, and spend more time posing for pictures than actually talking to Grandpa. But that didn't stop them from acting like the land was just as much theirs as it was mine. Tyler once told me, "We all come from the same roots, Nat. Don't act like you're the only branch that matters." Maybe not, but I was the only one who stayed. After Grandpa had his stroke when I was 19, I put college on hold, moved into the house full-time. I took over the bookkeeping, hired part-time help to manage the cattle, and learned to mend fences, replace filters, and keep the tractor from giving out during the hottest weeks of August. He couldn't speak clearly for months, but when he did, the first thing he managed to get out was, "Don't let M sell it." I promised him I wouldn't. That man taught me everything I know about self-respect and endurance, how to listen more than you talk, how to look someone in the eye, even when you're scared, how to hold your ground when everyone else is trying to push you off it. By the time he passed, I was 26. I just started looking into night classes again, thinking maybe it was time to pick up where I left off. But then came the estate process. The lawyers, the family meetings, the sudden uptick in phone calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. The will was clear. Grandpa split things evenly in theory. Eric got the mutual funds. Jenna received the Scottsdale condo. Tyler inherited a set of rental properties near Austin. And me, I got the land. No one said it out loud at first, but you could see it in their faces, that flicker of smugness, like they'd walked away with something real and I'd been handed a sentimental consolation prize. Jenna even said, "That place means so much to you. Grandpa must have known it would be safer with you than with us." Her tone was syrupy, but I heard the subtext, "Better you carry the burden." Uncle Rob, though, he didn't sugarcoat it. During the reading of the will, after everyone had nodded through their share and gotten up to leave, he slapped a hand on my back and grinned. "Well, enjoy the dirt," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Eric laughed. Tyler smirked. Even the lawyer cracked a smile. I didn't laugh. I just nodded and said nothing. The first few weeks after that were quiet. No one checked in, no one offered to help me settle into the new responsibilities. Not that I expected them to. I already knew the score. I had the upkeep, the property taxes, the leaking roof, the 3 tractors in various stages of decay, and the kind of isolation that weighs on you during long winters. They had liquidity, money in their hands, assets that didn't come with headaches or fences to patch. But I also had something they didn't. I had time. And I had every old notebook Grandpa ever scribbled in, whether records, supply logs, survey maps, and one journal in particular that mentioned a geology team visiting back in the mid-80s. There'd been some talk about mineral rights, exploratory drilling, but nothing had come of it, or so I thought. I kept that journal, even after most of his things were boxed up or donated. Something about those entries stuck with me. At the next family gathering, Easter brunch at Jenna's new place, everyone acted like the land was a joke we'd all agreed on. "So, Nat," Tyler said, loading his plate with deviled eggs. "Any gold nuggets turned up yet?" I smiled politely. "Just a few rattlesnakes." Eric chimed in, "You could always rent it out for rustic weddings. Lean into the charm." I nodded along, didn't argue. They thought I was clinging to a relic. Let them think that. Let them keep laughing. I'd been underestimated before. That summer, I started getting mail from a surveying company. One of the neighbors must have sold some rights, and their team was expanding into adjacent parcels. I let them take samples on the east side of the property. Just soil and rock cores, nothing invasive. They handed me a business card and said I'd hear from them if anything looked promising. Meanwhile, I got to work, repaired the barn roof, sold off old equipment, rented part of the pasture to a nearby rancher for seasonal grazing. Bit by bit, I made the place livable, sustainable, even, not flashy, but solid. No one in the family noticed, or if they did, they didn't care. What they didn't know, and what I kept to myself, was that something was happening under the surface. Something quiet, something patient, and when it finally came to light, the dirt they mocked would turn into the most valuable thing any of us had. But they weren't ready for that. Not yet. The first real sign was silence. Not a dramatic, fight-ending silence, just the slow, muffled kind that creeps in over time. Once the estate had been divided and everyone got their piece, I didn't hear much from anyone. No more texts from Jenna with new restaurant recommendations. No calls from Eric to update me on his newest side hustle. And Lindsay, who used to check in weekly like clockwork, vanished completely. I remember opening the family group chat one morning and seeing that no one had said a word in over 2 weeks. Before the will reading, it had been constant. Photos from Jenna's condo in Scottsdale. "Look at this view." Pictures of Eric's boat, bought with a slice of the mutual funds. Tyler posting a video from some outdoor patio bar, captioned, "Finally making this investment pay off." When I sent a picture of the restored barn roof a week later, fresh tin, bright white trim, cleaned gutters, not a single response. No thumbs up, no sarcastic comment, not even a "looks good" from my mom. I should have expected it. In our family, value was always measured in polish. Cars, watches, square footage. The idea that something old and worn down could have meaning beyond nostalgia didn't compute. I got used to being out of sight. The land was an hour and a half from the nearest major city, too far for spontaneous visits. I didn't mind. Being left alone gave me time to work. I spent most of the summer clearing brush, cleaning up the equipment shed, replacing busted fences. Not because I thought it would impress anyone, but because if I didn't take care of the place, no one would. When Thanksgiving rolled around, I debated whether to go. I'd RSVP'd yes, mostly out of obligation. Mom said it was at Tyler's new house, some sleek, open-concept thing with marble countertops and big sliding doors that overlooked a tiny backyard. I showed up a few minutes late, still wearing mud-caked boots from fixing a clogged drainage pipe that morning. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I was out of place. Everyone was dressed for Instagram. Glasses of wine were already in hand. Jenna had on a sweater that probably cost more than a month of groceries. Tyler greeted me with a slap on the back and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, look what the farm dragged in," he said. A few cousins laughed. I smiled, mostly because I didn't want to start anything. Dinner was exactly what I expected. Gourmet everything. There was a turkey roulade instead of an actual turkey. No mashed potatoes, just something called parsnip foam. I made a joke about missing the canned cranberry sauce, but no one laughed. At one point, I heard Eric and Lindsay whispering in the kitchen while I poured myself water. "She's still out there milking goats, isn't she?" "Probably filing for food stamps," Lindsay replied under her breath. They laughed. I stood there listening, not saying a word. Back at the table, someone asked how the farm was going. I gave a short answer, told them I'd started soil testing, that I was talking to a local firm about rezoning a portion of the eastern acreage. My aunt leaned back in her chair and rolled her eyes so dramatically I thought she might sprain something. "Rezoning? What for? A chicken sanctuary?" Everyone laughed again. I didn't bother defending myself. I'd learned by then that trying to explain long-term plans to people who only thought in quarterly gains was a waste of breath. A few weeks later, a man named Paul Fletcher showed up at my door. Drove a silver Range Rover and wore one of those thin designer scarves that didn't actually block wind. Said he was with a brokerage firm based in Dallas. "My name might sound familiar," he added casually. "I work with your Uncle Rob. He mentioned you might be looking to offload the property." I told him I was. He smiled like I'd said something cute, pulled out a folder and spread some papers across the kitchen table. "Camilla, listen, we're not trying to rush you, but the market's hot right now. Real estate's peaking in rural zones like this. You'll never get a better offer than what I've got here. It's generous, I'll tell you that." I looked at the number. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't close to what I thought the land could be worth in a few years if I played things right. "I'm not interested," I said. He nodded like he understood, but before he left, he leaned on the doorframe and said something I never forgot. "You've got a unique situation here, lot of responsibility, and I've seen how these things go. Nostalgia doesn't pay the bills. Land like this, people either cash out early or they lose everything when the next big drought hits." I didn't reply, just held the door open until he stepped through. That night, I called my mom and asked if she knew Uncle Rob had sent someone to talk me into selling. "Oh, honey," she said, "I think they just assumed you'd want out eventually. It's a lot to handle and you've always had other interests. Don't feel pressured, but don't shut the door either. This could be a great opportunity." It hit me then. They thought I'd cave, that I was dragging out the inevitable, that I was still playing house on Grandpa's land like some childhood fantasy, and eventually, reality would force me to do what they all expected: give it up, sell it off, walk away. They weren't worried, they were waiting. I kept working. Winter was coming in slow and dry, which gave me more time to finish clearing the field behind the barn. That's where the surveyors had taken their samples. I hadn't heard anything back, but I wasn't concerned. I knew enough to be patient. In the meantime, I met with a mineral rights attorney recommended by a friend from town. We reviewed the deed, dug up the old drilling leases, and found something buried in a footnote, an addendum Grandpa had signed in the '80s granting limited exploratory access, but no production rights. That meant if anything valuable turned up now, I'd be the sole point of contact for a new contract. I told no one, not even my mom. Christmas came and went. No one invited me to the family gathering. I saw the pictures on social media: Jenna in front of a fireplace that clearly wasn't hers, Tyler holding a baby I didn't know existed, Lindsay popping champagne in matching pajamas with the others. I was just a footnote now. But that was fine. I didn't need a seat at their table. I was building something entirely different, something bigger, something they wouldn't see coming until it was too late. Let them keep laughing. Let them keep thinking I was just out here clinging to Grandpa's old dream. They weren't ready for what was about to happen. And if I'm being honest, neither was I. It had been about 6 months since Grandpa passed, and the will was settled. I'd fallen into a steady rhythm by then: early mornings feeding the animals, mid-mornings handling invoices and phone calls, afternoons spent knee-deep in one project or another. There was always something to do. The water pump needed replacing. A section of fence collapsed after a windstorm. The north pasture was showing signs of erosion, and I was working with a local conservation office to develop a better runoff plan. I wasn't making much money yet, but I wasn't drowning either. I'd leased a portion of the land to a nearby rancher and negotiated a short-term equipment deal with a farming co-op in town. It was enough to keep the lights on and the taxes paid. Most of my time off the land was spent at the public library or town hall, reading up on zoning changes and environmental impact forms. I didn't tell anyone in the family about that. They wouldn't have cared, and if they did, they'd only twist it into something small. Then came Jason's birthday. Jason was Rob's son, technically my second cousin, but we grew up like siblings. He was the one who used to build tree forts with me in the summer, sneak me extra marshmallows during bonfires, defend me when Eric and Tyler teased me about reading books instead of riding dirt bikes. We lost touch after college, like most of us did. But still, I thought we were close enough that I'd get a text or an invite when he planned a party for his 30th birthday. Instead, I found out about it the way everyone finds out about things now, through a tagged photo online. It showed a long dinner table strung with fairy lights, filled with smiling faces holding wine glasses. I recognized almost everyone: Lindsay, Eric, Jenna, Uncle Rob, even our Aunt Marla who lived in Phoenix and hadn't been back to Texas in over a decade. The caption read, "All the smart heirs in one room clinking money." I scrolled down and saw another photo, this one a group shot, Jason in the center, flanked by Jenna and Lindsay, all dressed in black. The caption underneath, "Not pictured, our farmer cousin in overalls cowface." At first, I stared at it without reacting. Then I checked the date. It had been posted that morning. The party was last night. They hadn't just forgotten to invite me, they deliberately left me out. I texted Jason something short, just, "Hey, saw the pics. Any reason I wasn't invited?" He replied within a minute, "Didn't think you'd want to leave your cows." I stared at that message longer than I probably should have. It wasn't the joke itself. I could handle a little sarcasm. It was the implication, the ease with which he dismissed me, like I wasn't even part of the circle anymore. Like my life had become a running gag that they tossed around at dinner tables without a second thought. I typed a reply and deleted it, then typed something else and deleted that too. In the end, I didn't say anything back. The next day, I got a call from Jenna. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail saying I was missed at the party and they'd figured I was probably busy. Then she added, "You should have come. It would have been fun to catch up. Everyone had a lot of questions about how your little farm's doing." My little farm. That was the moment it sank in. They weren't just teasing me, they'd moved on without me. I wasn't family anymore. Not really. I was a reference. A side character. Something to laugh about when there was nothing else interesting to say. Later that week, I ran into Lindsay at the grocery store. She was in town visiting her mom and had stopped in for wine and whatever overpriced cheese she now claimed to love. I was picking up fencing staples and dog food. She spotted me near the checkout and waved like we were old friends. "Camilla, wow, it's been forever." "Yeah," I said, "guess so." She gave me a hug I didn't return, then stepped back and gave me a once-over. I was wearing jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt that probably had hay stuck to it somewhere. "You look earthy," she said with a little laugh. "Farm life treating you okay?" "It's fine." She tilted her head. "You know, Jason felt bad you weren't at the party." I looked at her. Did he? "Well, I guess no one really expected you'd want to drive out. It was pretty far from here." It had been in the city, 90 minutes away. I'd made longer drives just to get tractor parts. She shifted her weight and glanced toward the wine fridge. "Anyway, everyone's just doing their own thing now. You know how it is. Life gets busy." I nodded. "Yeah, I guess it does." She bought her wine and left. I stood in line behind a woman buying canned soup and wondered how many more times I was going to be told, directly or indirectly, that I didn't belong anymore. I drove home and walked the property line. The field where the surveyors had taken samples months ago was still untouched. I'd started noticing more activity lately, white trucks driving past slowly, new markers along the road. I hadn't heard from the oil company yet, but I had a feeling something was coming. I wasn't sure what it would look like or how fast it would move, but I'd learned enough to know that if they were sniffing around, it wasn't for fun. Still, none of that changed how I felt when I looked at those photos from Jason's party. They didn't hurt because I wanted to be there. They hurt because I finally understood something that I hadn't been willing to see before. I'd been erased. Not loudly, not cruelly, just casually. And somehow, that felt worse. I closed my laptop and went outside. There was still light left in the day, and the old generator by the barn needed fixing. I pulled on my gloves, grabbed the socket set, and got to work. Because while they were out drinking wine and laughing about the dumb cousin who inherited just dirt, I was out here learning how to build something from the ground up. And soon, they'd find out just how valuable that dirt really was. I didn't drive straight home after that run-in with Lindsay. I took the long way back instead, cutting across back roads until I was winding past rows of dormant cotton fields and rusted barbed wire. The air had that cold snap to it that told you winter was close, even if the leaves hadn't dropped yet. When I finally pulled up to the farm, it was already dark. I left the porch light off and walked out into the field with just my phone flashlight and the memory of every step it took to get there. I stopped in the middle of the clearing, the one just past the pond where the grass always grew patchy, and stood still. This was where Grandpa used to sit after long days, thermos in one hand, folding chair dug into the dirt like a throne. No matter how tired he was, he always came out here at sunset. Sometimes he'd talk. Sometimes he'd just listen to the wind. Land doesn't lie, he used to say. People do. Back then, I thought he was talking about neighbors and local gossip. Now I think he meant something bigger. The land shows you what it is. It doesn't dress itself up. It doesn't flatter or deceive, and it doesn't forget. That night I stayed out there for almost an hour. Not crying, not angry, just still. I think I needed the quiet to finally admit to myself that the family I thought I had, the one I kept trying to impress, to prove something to, was gone. Maybe it had never been what I believed it was. Maybe I'd always just filled in the gaps with hope. Either way, I knew something had shifted. I wasn't waiting around anymore. A few months before that, I'd reached out to an old friend from college, Sam. We'd taken a land use policy class together. Last I heard, he was working in mineral rights law in Oklahoma. I wasn't expecting much, just wanted help decoding some of the language I found in Grandpa's notebooks. But when I told him about the old geological surveys and the test markers that had shown up near the east pasture, he got quiet. "You got copies of anything?" he asked. I sent over what I had. A scanned copy of Grandpa's handwritten notes from the 80s, a few blurry documents from the county archives, and photos of the markers I'd spotted. Sam called back the next day. "Look, I can't promise anything, but it sounds like your land sits on a shelf that was flagged for exploratory drilling decades ago. Shale formation, possible reserves. If the right company's circling now, there's a reason." "What kind of reason?" I asked. He hesitated. "Let's just say no one drills blind anymore. They already know what's under there." It took me another 2 weeks to decide what to do. During that time, the family stayed quiet. No one reached out after Jason's party. No surprise visits. No check-ins, just silence. They thought I'd disappear. That I'd either give up or sell out. That eventually, I'd get tired of scrubbing mud off my boots and chasing stray cattle off the highway and accept their version of common sense. But the truth is, the more they ignored me, the more clearly I could see what needed to happen. I asked Sam to connect me with someone he trusted. A mineral rights attorney who wasn't just smart, but discreet. The kind of person who could negotiate without tipping off half the county. Within 2 weeks, I had a meeting with a representative from one of the larger energy companies in the region. They'd already done advanced testing. The reserves were substantial, deep, but accessible. The numbers they threw out made my stomach turn, not because they were bad, because they were big. We started talking terms. I didn't rush. I brought in a second lawyer just to review the tax implications. I asked questions I never thought I'd know how to ask. We talked lease structures, royalty rates, surface rights protections. I made sure the land would be respected. No fracking, no water contamination, no pipeline without review. And then I signed. The deal wasn't public yet. The company had to finish permitting, finalize their equipment contracts, and navigate the usual regulatory dance. But the royalty advance alone was enough to make my bank account look like someone else's. I didn't tell a soul. Not my mother, not Sam, not the woman at the post office who liked to gossip about anyone who added a new mailbox. I just waited. Every day I woke up early, fed the animals, managed my books. Nothing changed on the outside, but inside everything was shifting. I started drafting a plan for how I'd reinvest the money. I'd fix the south fence line, upgrade the irrigation, buy a newer truck that didn't need coolant every other week, and I'd finally take some courses again. Business, maybe, land management. Not because I needed the credentials, but because I wanted to be better prepared for what was coming next. And I kept thinking about Grandpa. He must have known, not the full extent maybe, but enough to point me in the right direction. Why else keep those maps? Why else make me promise not to let it go? He never said the land would make me rich, just that it mattered. I think he understood that sometimes what looks like the smallest piece of the inheritance ends up holding the most weight. That realization didn't feel like triumph, not yet. It felt quiet, steady, like the first rumble of something deep underground, moving in slow motion. I didn't know what the family would say when they found out. I didn't know if they'd congratulate me or try to worm their way back in or pretend none of it had ever happened. But I knew one thing for cert. When the checks started coming and the title filings went public, they wouldn't be laughing anymore. And I'd finally be able to stop proving myself to people who never really looked in the first place. The call came early on a Thursday in late January. I remember because I was still in my flannel pajamas, sipping coffee and staring at a spreadsheet tracking livestock expenses when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. The voice on the other end was polite, professional, said he was with Eagle Ridge Energy and that they'd completed all seismic testing on my eastern parcel. "We're ready to move forward," he said. "Your land sits on a productive formation with long-term potential. The reserves are substantial. Our legal team will be in touch within the week to finalize royalty terms." I didn't say much, just thanked him and hung up. Then I sat there in the kitchen, staring at the wood grain of the table like it might rearrange itself. The silence after that call felt louder than any family dinner I'd ever been to. This was it, the moment. The quiet part of the story where everything shifts and no one sees it yet. By early March, the paperwork was done. My lawyer negotiated a flat fee signing bonus and a per-barrel royalty that exceeded anything I'd even hoped for. There was a strict environmental clause, surface protection measures, and a provision that allowed me to retain final say over any additional infrastructure. 6 weeks later, the first check arrived by certified mail. $12,476,000. It didn't look real. The numbers didn't feel real. I reread the letter 3 times before I even opened the envelope. I deposited the check. Quietly, no new car, no flashy upgrades. I didn't even go out for dinner. I just got back to work. Because I knew what was coming. Small towns have long memories, but short leashes when it comes to secrets. Word spread faster than I expected. I didn't tell a soul, but someone at the bank must have said something to someone at the co-op, who told someone at church, who mentioned it to their cousin during a hair appointment. By the time Easter rolled around, I had 12 unread messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in over a year. "Hey Nat, thinking of heading your way soon, wanna catch up? Miss you, cousin, we should plan a girls' weekend. Any chance I can swing by the farm next week? Been meaning to visit." I didn't reply. The week after Easter, I got a call from Uncle Rob. I let it go to voicemail. He tried again 2 hours later. I answered. "Hey there, Camilla," he said, voice light, casual. "Heard through the grapevine that the land's paying off. Good for you. I always said there was potential in that dirt." I didn't say anything right away, just let the silence stretch. Then I said, "Funny, I remember you saying, enjoy the dirt." He chuckled, but it died fast. "Well, we were all just trying to lighten the mood back then." "Right. Anyway," he said, shifting gears, "I was thinking maybe we should get the family together soon. Reconnect. It's been too long." I told him I was busy, then I hung up. I didn't owe him an explanation. Within a few weeks, the tone of the messages changed. Less casual, more probing. Jenna asked if I'd thought about reinvesting with family. Eric sent a spreadsheet with a business opportunity that involved a VR startup in Austin. Lindsay invited me to speak at a panel she was hosting about resilience and modern land use, whatever that meant. I didn't respond to any of them. But I didn't block them either. I wanted them to see what silence looked like when it came from me. Then came the guilt. My mom called late one night, said she'd talked to Jenna, and everyone was just surprised by the news. That maybe I could take the high road, extend an olive branch. "They're your family, Camilla," she said. "No, they're not," I said. "They're people who laughed when I inherited land instead of cash, who cut me out of their lives until they thought I might be useful again." "That's not fair," she said quietly. "It's not inaccurate either." She didn't argue, just said, "Well, I hope you'll think about it." I thought about it. Every time I passed the field where the test wells were being drilled. Every time I sat down with my accountant. Every time I walked into a hardware store and paid in full for things I used to put on credit. They hadn't just underestimated me, they de-dismissed me entirely. And now they were circling, hoping I'd forgot. The temptation to throw it back in their faces was there. Of course it was. I imagined showing up to Jason's next party in something tailored and expensive, pulling up in a black SUV and dropping one-liners like I was in a revenge movie. But the truth is, I didn't need to perform my success for them. They were already talking, that was enough. Instead, I put my energy into planning. I hired a local builder to help restore the old bunkhouse on the back edge of the property. It had been caving in for years, but I had a vision for it. Guest quarters, maybe, or office space for a small land management firm I was quietly starting. I met with a nonprofit that supported young farmers and asked what it would take to create a local scholarship fund. I started researching foundations that backed women in agriculture and rural entrepreneurship. If I was going to be a success story, I wanted to be the kind that reached back, not just up. One morning in late April, I found a handwritten letter in my mailbox. It was from Lindsay. It was long, rambling. She talked about how proud she was of me, how she wished we'd stayed closer, how she felt bad about the stupid jokes and hoped I knew none of it was personal. I read it twice. Then I folded it up and put it in the drawer where I keep old receipts and vet bills. Maybe someday I'll answer, maybe not. Because here's the thing no one tells you about revenge. It doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it looks like silence, like building something so stable that no one can knock it over, like becoming the version of yourself they were never willing to believe in. They thought I'd sell the land, give up, move on. They thought I'd disappear. But the only thing disappearing was their hold on me. By May, there was no keeping it quiet anymore. The oil company filed their production notices with the county, and the mineral lease became public record. A couple of local blogs picked it up first. Then someone at the hardware store asked if I was that Camilla who hit the jackpot. After that, it spread fast. I didn't confirm anything, didn't deny it either. But I started getting a lot of invitations. Jason reached out with a voice memo, which he never used before. Said he was working on a new startup, something in sustainable housing, and thought it'd be great to have a family investor involved. He used words like legacy, long-term vision, and impact. Lindsay texted to say she was pregnant and wanted me at her baby shower. She even offered to host it near my town so I wouldn't have to travel so far from the farm. Jenna tagged me in an Instagram post about strong women and rebuilding from nothing. My name was in the caption, proud to call her family. Even my aunt, the one who'd once rolled her eyes when I mentioned rezoning, started liking all my old Facebook posts. She messaged me a Bible quote about forgiveness and said she hoped I was walking in grace. None of them said what they really meant. We underestimated you, and now we want in. It would have been easy to let it inflate my ego, to play generous, to pretend they were sincere, but I'd already seen who they were when they thought I had nothing. So instead of replying, I focused on what mattered. I hired a CPA to handle my taxes and set up a multi-tiered land trust. I wasn't going to let this money vanish in a couple of generations, or worse, be picked apart by opportunists with the same last name. Then I took a piece of the royalty check and created a local scholarship program. Not a big, flashy one, just enough to give rural kids a shot at trade school or ag college. I named it after Grandpa. Quietly, no press release. I also put together a grant fund for women working in small-scale agriculture. The kind who grew tomatoes for farmers' markets and fixed their own tractors. I didn't want to be the only one who made it out of the margins. The more I invested in real things, useful things, the less I cared about what my family thought. But they kept trying. Jason sent another message, this time with a full business plan attached. It was 6 pages long, full of vague charts and half-finished numbers. He closed with, "We could build something incredible together." I forwarded it to my CPA and asked if there was a polite way to say no without opening a door I'd rather leave closed. Lindsay sent an ultrasound photo. "Can't wait for you to meet your little niece." I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year. Jenna posted a throwback of us as kids in the hayloft, captioned, Some bonds never break. It was strange, watching them try to rewrite the story in real time. They'd mocked the dirt, dismissed the land, cut me out when I was scrubbing floors and replacing busted fence posts, but now they were acting like we'd always been close, like they'd always believed in me. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I started writing down what I remembered, dates, conversations, text messages I hadn't deleted. Not because I wanted to call anyone out, but because I wanted to make sure I never gaslighted myself into thinking I'd imagine the way they treated me. I kept receipts. Not just the literal kind, but the emotional ones. The day I stood in Tyler's kitchen listening to them laugh about me behind my back. The email from Jenna's husband that accidentally forwarded me a meme about heirs who don't understand asset liquidity. All of it I kept. Because when people decide you're beneath them, they don't expect you to rise. And when you do, they'll tell you it's just luck, that it could have been anyone. But it was me. And I wasn't the same girl they laughed at around that mahogany table. That version of me, the one who smiled through the jokes, who showed up to holidays even after being excluded, she was gone. This version, she had boundaries, a legal team, and a damn good memory. The transformation wasn't sudden. It came in small moments. Like the first time I turned down an offer without apologizing, or when I deleted Jenna's comment instead of replying, or when I saw Lindsay's baby photos and didn't feel guilt, just space. They'd chosen their distance, I was just honoring it. Meanwhile, the well pads went in. Trucks started rolling through town. The revenue projections climbed. I didn't flash it around, but I wasn't hiding either. I bought new fencing, restored the porch, paid off every remaining debt I had. And when someone asked me what it felt like, I said, quiet. Because that's what it was, not loud, not wild, just steady. Justice, when it's real, doesn't shout. It just settles in and stays. By summer, the same people who used to say the farm was a burden started calling it a beautiful property. Neighbors who once ignored me now waved at the gate. A local reporter called to ask for a profile piece. I declined. I didn't need a headline. I already had what I needed. A legacy that was finally mine. And the freedom to decide who got close to it. It was late September when Jason finally came out to the farm. No warning, no calendar invite, just a knock on the screen door while I was scraping old paint off the south-facing windows. I almost didn't answer, but something about the silence on the other side made me set the scraper down and open it. He looked different, less polished. No blazer this time, no sunglasses tucked into a shirt collar. Just jeans, boots, and a weather-worn hat that probably hadn't seen daylight in years. "Hey," he said. I stepped onto the porch and waited. "I'm not here for money," he added quickly. "Or anything, I just thought maybe we should talk." I didn't move, didn't say yes or no. He took that as permission and sat on the porch swing like he used to. I leaned against the railing. There was a long pause before he said anything else. "I've been thinking about what I said, what we said, last year and before." He shook his head. "I was a jerk. I thought I was being funny. I was." I didn't argue. "I think I was afraid," he said. "Of being the one who missed something big, afraid that you were right, that the land mattered, and I didn't want to admit it." I nodded. "That sounds about right." He looked out at the pasture, where a few of the grazing leases had started their fall rotation. "I saw the scholarships, the bunkhouse rebuild. I know you've been putting it to good use. I just wanted to say, you've done something real here, something more than any of us have." It wasn't dramatic. No tears, no big emotional release, just a quiet statement that felt like it had been building in him for a while. I appreciated that. I told him so. And that's where I left it. I didn't invite him in, didn't promise a future conversation or a spot at the next gathering, but I didn't slam the door either. Because the truth is, some part of me still believed in leaving room for people to grow. I just wasn't going to pave the road for them anymore. Jason got up to leave after that. We didn't hug. He just nodded and said, "Take care, Nat." I watched him walk back to his truck and disappear down the gravel road. The rest of the family, they didn't show, not in person anyway. Lindsay sent another message when the baby was born. I hearted it but didn't reply. Jenna invited me to a holiday fundraiser she was hosting for powerful women. I deleted the email. I didn't want revenge, I wanted distance. And I got it. The land was still here, still old and rough around the edges, but it had roots, and now I had the time and the means to care for it the way it deserved. I didn't lock them out entirely. I knew the history wasn't mine alone. Grandpa would have hated that. He always said family was like soil, you don't just throw it away because it gets messy. You learn how to work with it, or you decide where it ends. So I posted new signs. Not literally, though I did replace the rusted, private property markers with ones that were cleaner, clearer. But metaphorically, too. I made it known that the land was open to visit, to walk, to remember, but not to claim, not to leverage, and not to profit from. No trespassing without respect. That became my rule. Some understood it, some didn't. But I didn't spend time explaining it. Boundaries don't require justification, they just require consistency. One afternoon in October, Aunt Marla called, said she was passing through and wondered if she could stop by. I told her sure, but I'd be busy with the east fence line and couldn't host anything formal. She came anyway, brought cookies in a tin she probably hadn't used since Christmas '04. We sat at the picnic table near the barn, talked about Grandpa, about how stubborn he'd been, how he used to sneak butterscotch candies into church and pretend not to know how they got there. It was a good visit, brief, light. When she left, she said, "He'd be proud of you, you know." I didn't answer, not because I didn't believe it, but because I already knew. I saw it in the way the barn stood again, in the scholarships going out, in the well pad that hummed quietly in the distance, doing its work without fanfare. They didn't need to approve of me anymore. And I didn't need to prove anything either. I wasn't bitter. I was clear. And sometimes, that's the most peace a person can ask for. It's been 3 years now. Most mornings, I wake up before the sun, make coffee, and walk the perimeter of the main field before the emails start coming in. The barn looks nothing like it did the day Grandpa died, the siding-'s been replaced, the roof reinforced, the hayloft converted into office space for the foundation staff. There's a new greenhouse behind it, too, framed in cedar, already sprouting this season's seedlings under warm glass. The house still has its creaks and quirks, but I kept them. I sanded the original wood floors, patched the plaster walls, and added a wraparound porch. Solar panels run along the south side now. Water barrels catch runoff during the spring rains. Along the fence lines, we've planted native prairie grasses and wildflowers that used to be common around here before the land was flattened out for quick-yield crops. It's quiet, but not the kind of quiet that feels like absence. It's the kind that settles in when things are working. I run a conservation foundation out of this house now. It started with just me and a former classmate from the zoning board, someone I met when I was still filing permits by hand. Now there's a team, part-time but steady. We've preserved just over 2,000 acres across the county, working farms, creek corridors, pollinator zones, keeping the land in use without letting it be stripped bare. Some days we meet with ranchers. Other days it's lawyers, scientists, local school groups. We hosted our first youth workshop last spring. I watched a dozen 10-year-olds gather soil samples with plastic spoons, talking about climate change and native species like they'd known about them their whole lives. That's the kind of legacy I care about. The family doesn't joke anymore, at least not where I can hear it. Some of them come around, usually just for short visits, an hour here, a walk through the fields, a quiet look at what's changed. They bring polite smiles and careful compliments. I don't push them away, but I don't offer tour either. Jason stopped by last winter with his son, just the two of them. He didn't say much, but he helped me patch a section of the west fence without being asked. Afterward, we stood by the gate, sipping coffee from thermoses, and watched the fog lift off the pasture. He said, "You made it into something." I said, "It already was something, you just didn't see it." He didn't argue. Lindsay sent a Christmas card this year. The baby's a toddler now, with her eyes and her husband's smirk. She included a note that said, "Maybe someday she'll run through the fields the way we used to." I haven't decided if I'll write back. Jenna tagged me once in a post about women in leadership. I didn't respond, and she hasn't tried again. But the truth is, I don't need them to come back. I'm not building this for them. I'm building it for what it always was supposed to be, something that outlasts people's opinions, something with roots. Because that's what I learned here. The world tried to make me feel ashamed for inheriting dirt, for choosing something unglamorous, unpaid, forgotten. They thought money was the only thing of value, and land was just a placeholder until a buyer came along. But they were wrong. The land remembered what they forgot. It remembered every fence line Grandpa walked, every harvest that failed, and every one that didn't. Every time he patched something instead of replacing it. Every calloused hand that turned soil, or guided a calf into the world, or closed a barn door against a storm. This place holds stories, not all of them easy, not all of them beautiful, but all of them true. And now it holds something new. A second life, a forward motion. The well pads are still out there, but carefully maintained. We worked with the company to convert portions of the drilling lease into long-term conservation easements. I used part of the royalties to help nearby landowners do the same. The irony isn't lost on me. We used the oil money to protect the land it came from. There's a plaque near the main gate now. Small, hand-carved, it reads, "For those who stayed." That wasn't about me, not entirely. It was for Grandpa, for the field hands who showed up when their names were never recorded, for the neighbors who waved even when they didn't know your name. Staying isn't flashy, it doesn't make headlines. But staying builds things. When I think back to that moment at the will reading, Uncle Rob laughing, everyone smirking, I don't feel angry anymore. I feel clarity. They saw the surface, I saw the soil. They saw a liability, I saw a promise. I didn't know everything back then, I still don't, but I knew enough to hold on, to plant my feet in something deeper than pride or resentment. And I was right to stay. Not because of the money, not because of the accolades, but because now, 3 years later, there's proof. In the way the fields bloom. In the way people gather here to learn, to preserve, to imagine something different. In the way the house feels full, even when I'm alone. I don't measure my success by how many relatives apologize. I measure it by how the land breathes easier now. By how kids walk through these gates with curiosity instead of shame. By how much we've protected, quietly, steadily, and without anyone's permission. This wasn't about winning. It was about staying rooted long enough to grow something no one else could see. And in the end, that was the real inheritance. Not the dirt. The roots. Because that's where the power is, always has been, always will be. So what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have sold the land and walked away, or stayed and proven them all wrong? Have you ever been underestimated, only to come out stronger on the other side? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if you've ever had to cut ties, stand your ground, or reclaim what was rightfully yours, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about turning disrespect into power. Until next time, stay grounded.